Smart, fresh, and uplifting. We've got the stories that make you want to say,
What the hell?
Hello, everyone. I'm Hal Eisner, and I'm along here with Hunter Lowry and Elsa Ramon.
Hi, I'm Hunter Lowry, and today we have a remarkable story of trauma, but also the recovery and the determination to overcome it. But we do want to warn you, this is going to be a sensitive subject, and we may talk about some potentially triggering topics, so be advised.
And those triggering topics we would be talking about would be drugging and sexual assault. I'm Elsa Ramon, and in the summer of 2014, Summer Willis was a sophomore at UT Austin, where she was at a fraternity party where she says she was drugged and then ultimately raped. It's been quite a journey for her, but she is joining us right now to talk about what she experienced and what that experience led her to do up until this point in her life. So, first of all, Summer, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for being willing to talk about a subject that, although you are much, much stronger and have come a long way, I'm sure is still difficult to relive, to be able to tell the story to people who are learning about you.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. And you're right, when people share their stories of their survival, it's not easy. It's always hard, but I think survivors have to have we we're strong and we're resilient, and it's about turning that pain into purpose. So thank you for giving me that
Of
opportunity
of
today.
of course, but aside from I don't know that a lot of people think about this, but aside from the act itself and the trauma you directly went through, I could see going through the court process, the legal process, and finding out whether or not the laws are on your side or not can be equally traumatizing. You definitely faced that in the state of Texas when this happened to you. Why was this difficult to prosecute?
Yeah, so over 20 states in our country don't have a definition of consent, which is just crazy. What they have, at least in Texas, was consent is not. And so there is 15 definitions. And if you did not fit into one of these narrow definitions, then your case wasn't prosecutable. And so for me, it was you voluntarily took alcohol from one actor, another actor raped you, and so it doesn't count because we don't have that in this very narrow definition. And that was told to so many people in Texas that it didn't count. Another definition that was not there is if you had a natural fear response. You didn't yell, you didn't fight back, so they said it doesn't count. And so that is so hard to have this horrible thing happen to you, and for someone to say, "Well, the law, the people that would should protect you say, well, there's nothing we can do."
So what did you do? You responded to that emphatically.
Uh-huh. Yes, and I should say, like, all survivors heal in different ways, and it took me 10 years and 1 month to finally feel strong enough to share my story and to want to seek out justice. And that was 1 month too late because of statute of limitations. And then we had this consent law problem. And so, because I had just finished my healing journey of running 29 marathons across the United States and meeting survivors, I went to the Speaker of the House and said, I want to help. I want to make things better for survivors. What can I do? And they said, well, we actually have this law coming up that we've tried for 10 years to pass, but we haven't made any efforts to be able to get it through Senate. And I said, well, I had some luck getting media attention doing these 29 marathons. Maybe I can do something for you. Maybe we can get people to understand why we need a definition of consent. And so I decided I I brainstormed ways to get people to care, to get people to understand, and it was the hardest word that I wrote down was crawl, that it was a crawl to feel like myself again, a crawl to get in a healthy relationship, a crawl to tell people, a crawl to get justice. And so I decided I was going to crawl to the Austin Marathon to get attention. And my knees and hands gave out after half a marathon. So I got that world record, but didn't finish. But I ended up running the second half of the marathon, and the members of Texas, like the Senate and the House, finished the race with me arm in arm, and that's when they said, "We want to name this consent bill after you."
My
You
God, I
who
got
have
chills.
bloody hands and a fractured knee, like we want you to be the namesake of this bill. And so that was the beginning, and we kept on fighting all session, and it was truly like a storybook finish. It didn't feel like that at the time, but in the final hour, on the final day, we passed the Summer Willis Act, and
Wow.
we defined consent in Texas, and the amount of survivors who have reached out since then has just been incredible.
I just want to ask you. I mean, that's a absolutely phenomenal thing. I mean, I can't you know, congratulate you enough on the success you had. But when you step back a minute and you think in terms of the idea that you suffered depression, you suffered PTSD, you suffered shame, and all of this over the sexual assault and wanting to come back. There's this old saying that if you fall down a mountain, you climb back up again. But you became an endurance runner. You didn't climb, you ran, and I think you ran with a mattress on your back once or twice too, didn't you? Which
I
was an
did.
extraordinary thing to see. But I think what strikes me is kind of like Rocky running up the steps of the Philadelphia City Hall, whatever that was, and then the feeling of success. I mean, was that what you felt after all of that you had to deal with?
I love the Rocky reference, and yes, I love when people tell me something is impossible now, because I don't believe it is. It was impossible. I couldn't run a mile when I decided to run 29 marathons, and yet I made it to 29 finish lines. No one had ever in the history crawled for even a 5K, and I crawled to the half, and they said we would never pass this bill in Texas. And in fact, New York failed to pass a very similar law a week later. But we were the third state in the country to actually say if you're intoxicated, it still can count as rape. The
That's
third
And
fantastic.
state.
that needs a bit of clarification though, because
Sorry.
just no, 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 just to step back into the story, you had a spiked drink, is that right? That was given to you from one person, but then it was another person that assaulted you.
Yes. And because there is 2 actors instead of 1, it did not fit in that definition, but by the opposite of a definition, I guess. But because when you do have a definition, then um you don't need to fall into what consent is not. You can just have this broad definition that consent, has active participation, that the person is what would be the right word? That, like, in their minds, they're not unconscious, they're not fearful of their life. So I think these definitions and talking about affirmative consent and having those laws passed across our country is what we're trying to do. So yeah.
You mentioned, or Hal mentioned, one of the things that you did to capture media attention. You really had to battle upstream to constantly reinvent ways, it sounds like, to keep this in the media and keep this on people's minds. And Hal mentioned you ran with a mattress on your back. And I think a lot of people can kind of guess what that implies, but I really want it to come from you as to why you were willing to do that and why you chose that.
Yeah, there's a story that sticks with me, and it's actually from the Bible, but it's Jesus carried the cross, right, during Easter weekend, but he couldn't carry it all the way. There's this guy named Simon, and for a few miles, he had to carry the cross. And so that idea, along with the Columbia mattress story, it felt like me almost carrying the weight of not only my story, but survivors everywhere, and, sometimes that feels really heavy, and it also symbolizes this invisible weight because, I mean, if people looked at me, they'd be like, "Oh, she's the Peace Corps volunteer that smiles a lot and is married and have kids." But I think survivors can go their whole lives without telling other people, but it's always this trauma. You can't run away from the trauma, and it lives in your bones and in your brain, and it is this invisible weight that I chose to show the world, like, what it felt like to be a survivor, not only me, but all of these survivors that reach out to me on DMs across the world, like, every week. So, yeah, that's kind of the I'm carrying it for not only myself, but for others.
Are you continuing to get a lot of response from other survivors?
Every single week, a lot of either survivors or their parents go read about me, and they come to me and they say, "What do we do?" And so that's something my foundation is actually doing is we're creating the first map of resources for survivors, so they don't have to come to a random stranger. It's something that like exists in the world. So we're really excited to be building that because
Let's talk about the foundation because you haven't mentioned that yet.
Right.
it Yes. So, 3 years ago when I started these runs, I mentioned the DMs. Survivors are reaching out from me from all over the country, or I'm meeting them on playgrounds on Monday mornings. I'm running by them. There's just, we talk about this, but every 68 seconds, someone in the United States is assaulted. It affects 1 in 5 women, 1 in 8 men. So there's tons of us. And the stories are different. Sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're exactly the same as my story. But there's this pattern of silence and shame, and you're supposed to be a certain way. And so we looked at these root issues from all of these stories coming in, and that's kind of the foundation of the Summer Willis Foundation is we not only are storytellers, we're also creating the resources that we're getting asked for all the time. And that is really this map and also an upcoming project we have called the Denim Runs.
And I want to talk about it in a moment, but before let me just jump in. I'm sorry, Elsa. That's that's a staggering statement. Every 68 seconds, someone is sexually assaulted. You know that emoji where the head is exploding? That's me right now because that is just a mind blowing statistic. Every 68 seconds, and besides being mind blowing, the fact that with that metaphor of Jesus and the cross, this has been your cross to bear, and I think that this is that old thing about I'm not going to let something get me down. I am not going to let something get me down. I'm going to rise above it. That is the attitude, isn't it?
It is. I I learned, and I didn't always think this. I used to just cry and fall into puddles, like the trauma got to me. And it wasn't until a morning, just a random morning, I had a 4 month old and a 2 year old, and I started crying because I was triggered. And then they started crying. And in that moment, I realized I might not have deserved my trauma, but my boys, they definitely don't deserve to inherit this trauma. And that is when I promised them that I would try to be strong and resilient and maybe even whole. And I did that with the marathons. And each time I finished something that I thought was impossible, I started to see that there's not an impossible, that I could be strong, I could be resilient, and I could be a fighter, something I didn't believe I could be anymore.
I just want to, because we're on that topic, one of the things that struck me, not only the statistic about how often someone is assaulted here in the US, but the fact that you have throughout this journey of building resources and strength and awareness to everything you've been through, you've been flooded with DMs, you said every single day from people who have experienced trauma similar to yours. And the flip side to all the positive of that is the fact that this is happening so much. And the likelihood that you are talking to someone, another woman who has experienced something like that is extremely huge. I can tell you right now, you're talking to one here. 2 times in my life where, a guy tried to force himself on me at 2 very different times in my life. I was in high school the first time, and the second time I was at my first television job in Palm Springs. And, that's the sobering reality is that, yes, you're providing all this, these resources and awareness, and it's wonderful, and this has really given you power. But the fact remains that there are far too many of us who can say, if you picked us out of the crowd randomly, you can say, yeah, we've been through this too.
Yeah, I think it's far more than the statistic shows. I mean, 1 in 5 women and 1 in 8 men, those are the ones who came forward and talked about it. There are a lot of us hiding in the shadows who have experienced some things, and we don't talk about it, we don't share it, and it's supportive to know that others are going through something, and it helps you deal with your own situation and process that knowing you're not alone.
I want to get back to something that you were starting to talk about, Summer, and that is this Denim Runs series. And I think this is probably a good time to bring in Lawrence Cohen, because Lawrence Cohen is kind of your partner in this to sort shed a light on this problem. So let's get Lawrence in here, and let's talk about this idea of the Denim Run series. Hi, Lawrence, how you doing? And why don't you give us the definition of that? And there you go, right there.
Good. Uh,
What is
what
the
is
Denim Run series?
Denim Day? Started nearly 3 decades ago. There was an Italian woman who was raped. She was in court testifying, and the judge dismissed the case because she was wearing, when he found out she was wearing jeans. The very next day, the Italian parliament, all the women showed up wearing jeans in solidarity. And from then on, the last Wednesday of every April is Denim Day. So we figured, denim, April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And we thought we've got to extend Denim Day beyond one day. So we came up with the concept of denim runs, where people will run in denim, stand in solidarity. And that's the basic concept.
It kind of doesn't make sense what the judge said, except he was arguing that because she was wearing tight
Tight jeans,
jeans,
yeah.
she must have taken them off for her assaulter, and then therefore it was not voluntary, which was an outrageous concept, but that was his rationale.
And that takes exactly, Hunter, and that's what takes this full circle, because when the Summer Willis Act was passed, it was because there was no definition of consent in the state of Texas. And, when the governor of Texas signed that into law, the Summer Willis Act, for the first time in Texas history, now there is a very specific law about consent. And so, what I'm finding, the more I've been interacting with this community, and certainly with Summer, the courage, the resilience, those are two qualities that just need to be celebrated. There is not a day that goes by now where the name Epstein is not in the news, and the victims are still finding courage to come forward and speak. It's last Denim Day, I believe, Summer was in D.C. and she walked with people from the Epstein victims in D.C. So we're really taking this full circle now. I don't think sexual assault is ever going to be part of the past completely, but I do think that we need to take steps to show that we support people that are going through this. It's personal for me,
Let
you
me
know.
let me let me take this full circle though, Lawrence, because I want to get back to Summer, because as Lawrence just said, you participated in a Denim Day where there were Epstein victims that were there. What was that like for you? How did you interact with them? And did you sort of, engage together and almost form a bond?
So what happened was Virginia passed away 4 days before our Denim Day March,
One of
and
the
I
victims. One of the
Giuffre,
victims.
yeah, Virginia
yeah, Virginia
Giuffre.
Giuffre, which was one of the most prominent
Yes.
Epstein survivors, whose book Nobody's Girl just came out. Her death wrecked me because I've spoken about the DMs before. There are people, survivors, who don't think they can go on, and Virginia carried so much on her shoulders for so long. So it wrecked me, and so we were already planning this Denim Day March, and I said we should do this in honor of Virginia, so survivors know they aren't alone. So survivors see we wear denim and we show up during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And so, although I hadn't met any Epstein survivors by then, but when we finished, Virginia's family called and they were crying and I was crying, and they said, "You can't know how much this means to us that you're honoring our sister, that you're standing with survivors." And so, since then, they've advocated and come to press conferences with me in New York, in Texas for the Summer Willis Act, and they will be at our LA denim run this April.
I want to hear more about the denim run because we've obviously given everyone context of what was behind it and what you've gone through, and also point out that, for people, I'm sure you get also people who are just vicious and cruel to you too, and say things, that are just awful, which, explains why a lot of the Epstein survivors are still fighting to this day to be believed. They're being dismissed. But
Yep.
what you are doing here in this first denim run, is again drawing awareness and making sure this doesn't disappear from the spotlight, and inspires change in the laws to protect people if in the event they are uh, sexually assaulted. But tell us more about the event,
Well,
what's happening, Lawrence, and how people can support and what they need to do.
Well, the great thing is it's this Sunday, and you can just show up on Sunday at 8 o'clock at the Santa Monica Pier and sign up and participate. There is an entry fee to participate, and the money's going to go to help people who are dealing emotionally, um, physically, and mentally with the after effects of what it was like to be sexually assaulted. And this is not just going to be sort of a paint by numbers event. It's going to be very special, really, from the moment you arrive until the moment you leave. On the pier, we're going to have self-defense demonstration even before people go out onto the sand. When the participants go down onto the sand, they're going to pass through a combination of a cheerleader and lifeguard tunnel on the way to the start line. And in the sand, we're going to have bamboo sticks so people can write the names of a survivor. They can write a word of something that they would like to see be washed away and be part of their past. So by the time people come back to the pier where they'll actually hear live music, they will have had a very rich experience, and it'll be a personal experience. And I myself am going to write my mother's name on this in the sand. My mother was battered by my father, and my father was battered by her mother, his mother. And the truth is, you don't have to give credence to the idea that hurt people, but that is what happens. And so we're
Can I jump in for 1 second? I jump in for
pleased.
1 second because you said this Sunday, and I want to be clear for anybody who watches it after this Sunday that we're talking about Sunday, April 11th. So after Sunday, April 11th, there
12th.
will be other
12.
runs,
April
but they'll
12th.
be in
It's the
other
12th.
places. 12th, I'm
April
sorry.
12th.
It'll be in other places. So thanks for correcting me because I quickly glanced at the calendar, but April 12th is what we're talking about. And then it'll move across the country. Is that right?
That's
Yes,
correct. The next
Summer,
week, it will be in New York City on April 18th. And then it will conclude in Austin on April 25th. If you would like to participate, it's thedenimruns.com. You can check out more information about Denim Day, Sexual Assault Awareness Month and all of the details about the races. And I think what I realized when I was coming out as a survivor is that no one knows what Sexual Assault Awareness Month is. It's in April this month, and no one knows about Denim Day, not really. And when it is talked about, survivors aren't celebrated. Like, there's not a party for us. There's not a something saying you're strong, you're resilient, you're courageous, like we've talked about before. And so we're creating these events. So there's finally something to say, we see you, your neighbors are showing up, these businesses are showing up, these nonprofits are showing up, this really cool DJ showing up. Like, we're here to say, we're with you, we stand with you. Happy April.
I,
You
I,
Can I
deserve
I
ask
it.
a quick question?
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Hunter. No, Hunter, go ahead.
This is this is kind of personal, but it's something that's been on my mind, and especially since Lawrence brought up the concept of generational trauma. Um, I'm all about supporting the women. We need to support the women, but we also have to talk about the guys. And you have two little boys, and this must have crossed your mind. How are you going to explain to them what mommy is doing, what this whole concept is? Well, I mean, not now, clearly, but as they grow up, how do you get that across to the next generation?
Yeah, I was actually just asked to write an op-ed about this because people are really curious about how do we make a change, and it's starting with a younger generation. So my boys are 3 and 4. They already know how to fill in the sentence no means no. Because it doesn't have to be about sexual assault. It can be about sharing. It can be about not getting a hug. And so starting early with age appropriate lessons, they
Boundaries. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
No,
You're
you
smart.
can't hug someone without asking, like, these little lessons, and as they develop and age, you can have more conversations. One of my favorite moms of a friend had a son who was going to college, and she said, "This is what you're going to see in college. If you ever do see it, you help the girl, you stop it, or the boy." And so I think it should be a conversation. People don't wanna talk about sexual assault, and I think a beautiful thing the Summer Willis Foundation does is we have talking circles. We're at Gloria Steinem's house. We're going to be in LA, and we invite these small community groups to be able to talk about sexual assault. And they say, we want to do this with our friends because it's not going to stop if we keep on pretending it doesn't exist.
I love
We need to
that.
have the conversations.
I love
And
that.
Hunter
Yeah,
and
that
Hunter
just,
and Hal, I
no
don't know if
shame.
you, Hunter and Hal, I don't know if you can even remember how shy Summer was when we first sat down about this almost 2 years ago now. And now, she has a film coming out about a letter to my younger self. She's been on every screen at every Lemley theater for the last month. They've been nice enough to help promote our denim runs. And Summer's the star of the 90-second piece that we put together. So everybody who will be at the event in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, will be familiar with Summer by that point. And I see this, I represented the LA Marathon for 15 years. And in all the years I represented the LA Marathon, it grew year after year after year. So we're at a starting point here. And this is the beginning of a movement. And this is a movement
This is
that
a
will
strong
grow.
starting point. This is a
It
And
very
is.
strong
very,
It
starting point.
is.
But I also want to point out, Lawrence, too, which I'm sure you know, we're going to add swimming into this as well because Summer, who's preparing to swim across the English Channel to raise awareness?
Yes, I am postponing that a little
Okay.
bit, but that is something the Summer Willis Foundation will do is we're going to have these endurance events like swimming the channel in a relay where people can actually join and come and reclaim their stories, whether they're a survivor or a supporter. And so the English Channel relay is something that will be happening, just not this August, because as Lawrence said, we're in film production right now and hosting runs across the
And it's
country.
for a documentary. Is that correct? You're in film production for to be part of a
Yeah,
documentary?
so it's It's a 6-minute short film, and it's animated, and we have the most badass team. Can I say that?
Yeah,
We're
yeah, yeah, yeah.
podcast.
of
Yeah,
of
you can say
Free.
that.
executive
Free.
producers. We have an actress that I cannot name yet, but will be official soon, that has been doing such great work in this space. And then 3 Oscar-nominated producers. And so we're all coming together. And then world-renowned artist Hisco Hulsing, who's animating my story. So it's like live action footage that will be like animated on top of it. And the UN has already offered to screen it to do affirmative consent, get it on the Hill, and get it into schools, Hunter, like you were talking about, because everyone can watch a 6-minute video. And I keep on saying it's what one night can take in the decade it can steal, and really showing it's not just a night. It can be a whole life. It can be a decade. And so getting that in front of people.
We
Yes,
need
Hal.
to wrap this up, but let me just sort of say this. Can I, Summer? Can I say you're a badass?
Sure.
Can I say that?
Yes,
Look,
yes, you
I think
can.
we can.
Summer, do me a favor and give everybody your website so they can find it, and then let me sort of say something after that.
Yes, absolutely. The website is summerwillisfoundation.org. Same with the Instagram handle, and they can also follow the Denim Runs on Instagram. That's where all the information is.
Now, we
Thank you,
talked
Hal.
a couple of years ago, and I see an even stronger, more confident, more resilient woman than I saw then, and I was pretty impressed back then. So, I'm amazed at your uh, endurance. I'm amazed you're an endurance athlete, but mentally, you are just so strong. I want to be you when I grow up. I'm just so amazed at you, and you've done so well, and I just want to thank you, and I want to thank Lawrence for being with us. This has been a really interesting session of What the How. Thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next
Thank
time.
you
Bye bye.
all.
Good. Take good care.
And that's What the How 2.0. I'm Hal Eisner, along with my co-hosts Elsa Ramon and Hunter Lowry. Hunter is our content producer. Jamie Knapp is our technical producer, editor, and handles all post-production. Earlier versions of the podcast, produced at the studios of Fox 11 in Los Angeles, are available through the link in our show notes. This version of the podcast is distributed by rss.com and available wherever you listen to podcasts. What the How 2.0 is produced in Los Angeles, California.